Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room, a little show that tries to pack a punch every week as we look at local, national, and international stories and give our 2 cents, or even more on occasion. I'm Robin Adair, and across town is my co-host with the most, the Croatian sensation himself, who makes good sense all the time, John Jurisic. John, what a great show we have.
Great to be back with you, Robin. Love doing this. And yes, we do. We have a great show. All kinds of stuff yet again to talk about. So let's start off. Within the case of environmental protesters, it's more of the same, Robin. Obviously, a small element of the environmental movement has decided that extreme actions need to be taken to force society and our government to change its ways. But I think their legitimate message gets lost in an angry public backlash. Robin, this type of protest does not work. It doesn't change one person's mind. Last year, we saw a number of highway and bridge blockades across the province where the public got angry and pissed off. And at least one protester on a ladder was pulled down and hurt, could have died. Now we have our latest spectacle. It's a spectacle, as police have arrested 3 people for throwing paint at the beloved mammoth at our BC Museum here in Victoria. These protesters are not bringing the average Canadian, if not any Canadian, frankly, on side, even though most people strongly favor the objective. We want to clean up the planet, Rob.
And we want to have open dialogue. Open dialogue is the most important thing in a democratic society. People turned out to the legislature in droves, as they should. They demanded a halt to old growth foresting and have every right to do that, every right to be there. But a small minority grabbed the headlines, disfiguring public statues and landmarks like the woolly mammoth. And this hurts the entire movement.
Yes.
People like Neil Young and Dr. David Suzuki stood in front of supporters calling for protection of trees and the planet. Suzuki called for an inventory of our natural resources to find a balanced way to protect our trees, rivers, and animals while still maintaining a sustainable energy industry. But everyone isn't impressed, particularly with the actions of Neil Young, who got up and sang Heart of Gold for the crowd. And they made their expressions very clear to us by note to the Rumble Room.
Do they ever? So here's a note from longtime Rumble Room viewer Paul. Hi, Paul, who writes, "I can't stand Neil Young, a Canadian comfortable in his ivory tower in LA, doing everything in his power to destroy the economy of Western Canada." Paul continues to write, "I can't even listen to his music anymore. After all the harm that he has done to Canada's energy industry, now he has his sights on killing our forest industry."
Well, Paul, I really respect you writing us that note. There's lots of people that share that point of view. And on the flip side, there's plenty of people who have an entirely different way of looking at this. And again, this is what a democracy is all about, the freedom to express our views in an open way through open dialogue, hopefully, eventually reaching consensus. And we'll cross our fingers on that. And speaking of expressing views, recently I spoke about the retirement of Premier John Horgan from government.
Did you ever?
He's leaving politics, of course, because he's faced cancer a couple of times. And, that's been really tough. And John Horgan, I said in a nutshell, has showed very good political instincts. And he was running the province and, by all accounts, was able to do this with a high approval rating, which he maintained, and one of the highest of any premier in BC, and certainly one of the highest across the country as he left. Well, that's what I said, and we certainly heard from our viewers on that.
Boy, did we ever. And Robin, for our viewers, we've reached out to John Horgan and have invited him to come onto our show, and I don't see why he wouldn't. So fingers crossed. Back to our viewer response, however, and boy, you're right, boy, did we have a lot of reaction. For example, Daryl comments, He left because he had done so much damage to this province. He thought he couldn't do any more. And this gentleman concluded, Eby will finish the job that Horgan started and totally destroy the economy in this province.
On the flip side, we also heard from Roger. And Roger said, loved your show with John Horgan. Great job, gentlemen. And he went on to say, I totally agree with your read on Horgan.
Man, Robin, the critics were out in big numbers. That's great. We love that. At least they're not throwing paint at their screen. Doug wrote, now, these two guys are a couple of real crackpots. Was that you and I he was referring to? We'll never know.
Oh, I think we know, John. I think we know.
And Linda added, paying tribute to a man who wanted to ruin BC? What's wrong with you people? Are you going to pay tribute to Eby next? You like the fact that they are Trudeau's puppets.
We again express many views on this show, and we respect the views of our viewers and appreciate them writing in. But be clear, to be very clear on the John Horgan issue for one last time, I am not and never have been a supporter of the NDP, the New Democratic Party. There's plenty of their policies that I take great exception to. But I like to think I call a spade a spade. John Horgan, I believe, showed strong political instincts and leadership qualities. Did I agree with all the things he did? Of course not. That doesn't mean he didn't show strong leadership qualities. Does David Eby have those same qualities? Well, the jury is really out. And when it comes to Justin Trudeau, I'd say the jury is actually in and deliberating right now because he's in hot water. There's no question that the Chinese government interfered in our federal election process on the last two federal election campaigns at least, and helped Liberal candidates win in certain ridings with money, and also volunteers, student volunteers, who they bust in to help put up signs and help get behind candidates. And, this has all been done on the QT. An Angus Reid poll just out shows that 2 out of 3 Canadians say that China has been meddling to keep Liberals in power. And in response to this, Trudeau throws out the racism card.
One of the things we've seen, unfortunately, over the past years is a rise in anti-Asian racism linked to the pandemic, and concerns being arisen around people's loyalties.
On the flip side of this, here's what the Conservative opposition has to say about Trudeau's refusal to hold a special independent investigation into Chinese interference into our political system.
Justin Trudeau knew about this interference, and he covered it up because he benefited from it. He is perfectly happy to let a foreign authoritarian government interfere in our elections as long as they're helping him. I believe we need a public registry of all those who do paid work on behalf of foreign authoritarian regimes to influence or manipulate our politics or government.
So, no doubt, Justin Trudeau is in serious, as you mentioned, political hot water. Ouch, 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 ouch. Even newspapers like the Globe and Mail, which traditionally support the federal Liberals, and Liberals in general, are questioning his leadership.
It's true, John, and I think that this is a momentum that's starting to head across the country. We'll see where it lands. He's been able to survive other problems that have happened over the years, other controversies, Judy Raybould-Wilson leaving, Bombardier, other issues that have come up for Mr. Trudeau. He's been able to get around. We'll see if he manages to get past this, but there's a lot of furor right now right across the country. And, I can tell you, John, firsthand from political campaigns that I actually worked on in Vancouver, I saw firsthand the consul general of the Chinese actually showing up at some Canadian events. I remember a Christmas party I attended once. A Chinese consul general showed up, and that was great. We didn't think too much at the time, but I remember when the campaign was on, suddenly all these Chinese students arrived from UBC and SFU, and these weren't Chinese students that were from Vancouver. They were Chinese students from China who were studying here and were asked to come on board and learn about the Canadian election process through helping our campaign. Well, who was asking them to do that? And then I also spoke to an editor of one of the Chinese daily newspapers in Vancouver, and he said that it was well known within Chinese circles that many of the newer Chinese associations, benevolent associations, the newer ones, were actually funded and in some ways controlled by Beijing. And so Trudeau must know all this. He has to do better. And John, let's move now from that. We're going to dial things back, and we're going to talk for a few minutes about the BC budget.
Robin, first time I've heard that story from you. That's very discouraging. I'm sure we'll have some viewer mail about that, as we will about the BC budget. There has been a lot of money committed to housing and healthcare this time around, but we're also told that there will be now deficits coming in the years ahead, as there is this year. Money is getting tighter, so we'll see how this government deals with its priorities. I mean, at some point, there's just not enough money. It's been demonstrated over the years. For example, it's now been announced that $1 billion, that's a B, new dollars will be directed at addictions and mental health over this next decade. Yay, great. Advocates for addiction services say we need a lot more facilities and free beds. But at least this is a step in the right direction. Leslie McBain is the founder of Mums Stop the Harm. She's with us now. Let's zoom her in, Robin.
And now, again, joining us in the Rumble Room is Leslie McBain, and calling us from her lovely home on Pender Island. Leslie, thanks for coming back to the show.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
Well, there's so much to ask you about because, let's face it, addictions and mental health seem to be top of mind in the province right now. We had Kevin Falcon and the BC Liberal opposition coming forward with a $1.5 billion proposal. And then what do you know? Suddenly there's Premier David Eby coming up with his own proposal. It's over $1 billion, talking about treatment, recovery beds. It's all good news, or it sounds like really good news, and $1 billion does sound like a lot of money, but is it even close to what's really needed on the ground?
I actually can't answer the financial parts of it. Like $1 billion is a lot of money. And I could be wrong in this, but I believe it's over 10 years. I saw there somewhere, it might have been in Kevin Falcon's or the Liberals' statement. So I don't know really what that means in terms of reality. What I do have comments on is where they want to put this money, and it's heavily from both parties on treatment and recovery, which is a good thing. I mean, it will take. We've heard this for years. Oh, we're putting more money. The Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, the Minister of Health. Say we're going to build these facilities, we're going to have so many more beds, we're going to have all these services, and it actually hasn't happened yet. Here we are 7 years into the public health emergency, and mental health and addictions has never been treated as an emergency. So and what we always say, and I've said this so many times, that dead people don't recover. So neither party really put any emphasis. There was maybe one small line about a safer supply of drugs available to people who are addicted or dependent on opioids or other drugs as well. So we continue to see the deaths rise. They don't slow down. Maybe for a month they have a few less deaths, but in all nothing's changing in terms of deaths and wait times for services. So I think it's aspirational, frankly.
Leslie, yes, thank you for joining us again. Love the Pender Island look there. Outstanding. I remember the last time we talked about decriminalizing drugs to making a safe supply available to addicts to reduce the death count. Is this actually happening? What is the situation right now regarding deaths from overdoses and fentanyl?
Well, as I say, an average of 6 people a day are dying in BC from toxic poisonous drugs. And those poison drugs almost always, I think 85% of the time, contain fentanyl. Sometimes people who are addicted need fentanyl. They're addicted to fentanyl, but for bad reasons, or I don't want to say good reasons, but so it works for them. But many people who are accessing street drugs, they have no idea what they're getting when they have to buy off the street. They don't know how strong, how much fentanyl's in there, and so they're dying. So there's a direct correlation between the addition of fentanyl into drugs. That sometimes the fentanyl is in cocaine, sometimes it's in methamphetamine, sometimes it's in MDMA or ecstasy. So it's a crapshoot, frankly, and people are dying because of it. Now, I think you asked me one other question within that answer.
It's around decriminalization,
yeah, sure.
and in fact whether
Which
that's
is federal,
working.
not provincial. It's federal, not provincial.
Yeah.
It's provincial, not federal.
Oh, is that right?
It's
I thought
only
Justin Trudeau had to approve it for it to go forward.
Oh yeah, but the feds had to approve it, but it didn't spread across the provinces. It's only in BC. We're basically a test project for decriminalization. It's a good step, and I may have said this last time, it's a positive step, acknowledging the need for decriminalizing people who possess small amounts of illicit drugs. That's what decriminalization is. It means that if a person is walking down the street and they have in their pocket 2.5 grams or less, which by the way is way too small, but that's what we got, and they have an interaction with police for any reason, the police cannot charge them with possession of illicit substances. So this is a good step. It's not perfect. It's flawed, but there we have it. So it is, like I say, it's not going to stop the deaths. You cannot correlate decriminalization of small amounts of drugs with less deaths. People will do what they're going to do, no matter decriminalized or not.
Still with decriminalization, some of the opposition to it, you hear it in Ottawa, you hear it, frankly, from some of the members of the Conservative Party, is their feeling is that you make it more widely available, and then that makes people even more vulnerable, that people are going to be selling it more widely, to be more available for people that maybe wouldn't normally fall into drug addiction. Do you think that's a legitimate point at all?
Nope, I do not. It is not a legitimate point. First of all, it won't make it's as widely available as it's going to be right now, and it's going to stay that way. The marketplace for illicit drugs is not going to be reduced or increased by decriminalization. First of all, and second of all, there's no evidence that shows that people will say, oh boy, I won't get arrested for 2.5 grams. I'm going to try this. I'm going to walk to my next party with this drug. It's interesting that many, if not most people who use illicit drugs are not aware of what decriminalization means. The general public isn't quite aware of. So I'm glad you're asking me this, what it actually means. It's a small step in awareness, I think. But no, it's not. It won't do anything to the marketplace. It will not do anything to the number of people who use illicit drugs. And I just think it's just keeps some people out of the criminal justice system, which is exactly how it should be.
Leslie, so if the province now is making noise and stating that they are going to take decisive action to deal with treatment and recovery of addicts, in fact, what is it what does that mean? What must they do? Is there a model out there that's already working? For example, the one in Portugal, can you give us some reaction to that?
Switzerland is actually a more realistic model than Portugal in this respect. And Portugal's good. And we being Canada, could implement this model, although we are obviously have more population in our bigger country. Switzerland they got rid of all overdoses by providing a safe supply of drugs at clinics that people who are addicted could access. So what this did, it destigmatized heroin use. It was mostly heroin, opioids, destigmatized it. People could go get what they needed and then go to work or get a job or, have housing. I mean, it loosened up the whole thing for people who use drugs. And they didn't have to go searching out the street corner. So providing a safe supply made a huge difference in the drug using population of Switzerland. In addition, they put all the money they saved, and some of this is true for Portugal as well, into treatment, into accessible treatment, accessible counseling, opioid agonist therapy, drugs that help people not go into withdrawal. They did all the things. I want to go there. Actually, I've been there as a tourist before, but I want to go talk to the people there because it is so successful. And Switzerland is a country, as we know, that's pretty straight-laced in a lot of ways, but they did the right thing with people, for people who use drugs. Portugal decriminalized drug use. If you're caught with illicit substances in Portugal, you can go to a drug court, or you can. I think they have, they offer treatment. Nobody goes to jail unless they're big-time dealers. But again, they treat people who use drugs or who are addicted or dependent as human beings with an issue, with a health issue. We don't do that. Is that a long answer to a short question?
No, I love your answer because I think people need to hear that detail. My understanding is a significant number of addicts also have mental health issues, and this covers both mental health and addictions. They almost go hand in hand. And what about this issue of involuntary treatment? You said Portugal, they have a court if you don't go in for treatment.
Yeah.
In Canada, there's been a real push that you don't want this catch and release stuff. If people are seriously addicted and are doing criminal behavior as well, whether it's selling their bodies or they are breaking and entering or they're doing all the things people have to do to support a habit, there is a concern that we're not doing very much about getting these people into treatment and keeping them there until it takes. In other words, they can check themselves out, apparently. And the other side of the thing is there's criticism that if you are to get heavy-handed, you're infringing on people's personal rights. And this is a very marginalized group to start with. What are your feelings about all that?
Wow, that is a really complicated question, which has a lot of different pathways. So there's a huge spectrum here of people who have mental health issues and are also addicted to substances. So there's that kind of mental health issue. And then it goes, across the spectrum to somebody even with childhood trauma or depression and anxiety who is self-medicating so they won't have that pain. My son was in that category where he had a few things, nothing that you would notice, but he had ADHD. So many individuals with ADHD use opioids, for instance, to settle down the brain. And that's what he was doing I don't think he actually knew that that's what he was doing. He just knew that opioids made him feel like a normal person. So you've got, the whole spectrum from very severe mental health issues to ones that we don't notice sometimes. Involuntary care has been proven, and the research shows that it does not work on most individuals.
So in conclusion, Leslie, do you believe that Mums Against Harm, your organization, are finally succeeding after so much loss of life? Is society and government potentially now intent? Are they waking up and hopefully turning the tide on this terrible epidemic of wasted lives and death, tragedy?
I think the Titanic is slowly turning away from the iceberg, but not quickly enough. People are dying. People are still dying. People are still on the street because of their addiction or their mental health issues. Mom Stop the Harm advocates. I'm on several government committees. We do the best we can to get our voices in there across the country. But just talking about BC, they're talking about better decriminalization, which is fine. You know, like I say, it's not going to stop the problem. But I'll be meeting with Minister Whiteside. I've met with her once. I like her. I think she's a strong minister, probably the strongest we've had in the last few years. And we're talking about regulating the recovery industry. We're talking about how safe supply can be expanded from these little pilots. So we're getting there, but it's just 7 years since the emergency was declared. So we're not happy with that. We still have hope. So we'll just continue, banging down doors as best we can.
Leslie McBain is certainly a fine example of somebody showing tremendous leadership. She gets a big thumbs up. Somebody who's gone through terrible personal tragedy, through the loss of a son because of addiction. She rose from that, formed this organization. She's working so hard to improve lives. Whether you fully agree with all the objectives, you can't say anything negative about the big push that's going on by Leslie and her group to try to do better for people on the street who are very, very sick because of drugs and drug abuse, and of course also the mentally ill. John, before we flip it over, I just want to mention that we are looking carefully to see what happens with the railway decision. Ottawa is going to decide whether there is indeed going to be a railway on Vancouver Island. We should know soon. We will not have a comment on it on this show. We'll wait until we can get more feedback and more reaction, but we will have something on that soon. And on that happy note, we're just about ready to wrap things up. Maybe we could talk about how people can reach out.
Robin, it's just so great. We've had, I don't know who isn't listening to the Rumble Room. Most of the planet. There I go. There, the salesman in me is coming out. We really appreciate everyone who supported the program. And every week it's more because there's so much news to talk about, so much news to comment on. We're close to 900,000 viewers now since we started several years ago.
2 years.
And certainly
2 years ago.
2 years ago.
2 years.
Yeah, 2 years ago. So it's an honor for us to serve the community by keeping this dialogue open. It was just a hobby for you and I. It seems to be now a way that people are discoursing on the internet. You can follow us on all kinds of variety of platforms. Facebook, of course, is our core platform. There's Twitter. There is our YouTube site, which gets a ton of interest. I must say about Twitter, this last week, close to 5,000 views on our Island Rail commentary. So it's an active platform for the Rumble Room. We're also on Instagram, we're on TikTok, and we're in a variety of Facebook news groups. So for now, I remain your humble servant, all of you, not in the payment or delivery of anything Chinese. My name is John Jurisic.
And I'm not in the payment of anybody. My name's Robin Adair, and rumble on.